Hello, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. My name is Chloe Tonis, and this week we will be discussing ransomware. That is a brand new variant that is especially dangerous, not only because you can't control it, but seemingly because the group behind it also can't control it. Sickery ransomware is one that you should never pay up if you're hit by it, and yes, I say this for every ransomware with some nuance for complicated situations, but this one for real is something you should never pay. Ransomware is a type of malware that encrypts your systems, essentially preventing you from accessing anything, until you send a payment, usually in cryptocurrency, to the attackers. Usually, they will give you a decryption key to unlock your systems again, and all is good. Ransomware is usually effective because historically groups do actually give you the keys. If they didn't, word would spread super quickly and no one would pay them, so they'd never actually make any money off of this, and would instead be mostly wasting their time and resources. Sickery, however, is not a typical ransomware. It had a pretty terrible defect in the code, one that completely throws out the ransom keys so no one can get it, not even the attackers. Analysts found that Sickery generates fresh RSA key pairs every time it's executed. So, every one attack gets a different key. The issue is these keys are not being stored anywhere. In most cases of ransomware, a public key scheme is used. The attacker retains the private key, or if they don't, they're able to generate it again later with some software they have. They are in control of the keys the whole time, which makes sense. Sickery doesn't do this. For some reason, it generates the key pair on the victim's own systems, and then immediately discards the key once everything is encrypted. So the attackers never had the key in their possession to begin with, and they can also never access it again. Oops. The attackers will still try to negotiate because they want your money, obviously, but there is absolutely nothing you or they can do to get your data back. If this ransomware hits your environment, long story short, you should just assume all is lost. This has left the cybersecurity community with one pressing and important question. Was that on purpose? Did they mean to do that? The answer is probably no. But another question is, how could you accidentally write ransomware that throws out the key and just not notice? And the answer to that is a combination of people trying to be ransomware attackers that don't actually know what they're doing, and vibe coding. Signs point to the threat actors behind this ransomware being very inexperienced, you could say, and trying to vibe code their own ransomware strain using AI. This isn't coming out of absolutely nowhere. There are signs that this was indeed AI-generated code, mostly that it was very poorly written in general. Sickery seems to be hiding more secrets, though. It brands itself as Israeli or Jewish, using Hebrew, historical Jewish symbols, and then randomly extremely right-wing references? Believe it or not, most ransomware organizations that are not explicitly hacktivists are generally pretty non-political. They're financially motivated and don't really have any sort of message, just targeting any organization that they're able and not really bothering to say or do much politically. It's not really aligned with their goals. They may attack some government bodies, but the goal is ultimately finance and not necessarily destabilizing a country or benefiting one political party over the other. You may have even noticed that the word Sickery itself is even a reference to a group of Jewish assassins in the 1st century who used daggers to assassinate Roman occupiers in Judea. Based on kind of the theme of this ransomware, you may assume that they do much of their communications in Jewish spaces or in Hebrew. That is not the case. All of their actual online activity is conducted in Russian. The Hebrew used for their actual ransomware operations notably has many translation errors, suggesting it was done with something like Google Translate, rather than someone actually familiar with the language at all. The operator of the ransomware in public chats has also been requesting different ransomware APKs, which is not exactly how ransomware as a service works. You typically need to, buy it as a service. But it does seem to suggest someone rather inexperienced, maybe looking to study ransomware code, or more likely feed it to their LLM to write better ransomware, as clearly they need it. So far, the ransomware is not super widely used, and only a handful of small businesses have been hit. The attackers claim that all of those businesses have paid the ransom, and we can't necessarily verify this. Hackers lie all the time about a lot of things. But if they did pay the ransom, they're still going to be left in the dark, having to rebuild everything, and now having lost probably quite a bit of money. I'm pretty sure that for some reason this is a rather inexperienced group of threat actors trying to make a false flag operation rather poorly. Another thing I didn't mention is that they have a geofencing check to prevent execution of the ransomware on Israeli systems, which is a really strange design choice, and in my opinion makes it pretty clear that this is a false flag. Even though this is a really small, more obscure case, I still think it's really interesting to cover just because of how bizarre it is. So I hope you enjoyed this episode too. Because this case is so bizarre, there's a lot of really well-written research on this, so I would like to give a huge thanks to Checkpoint and Halcyon.ai, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, for their research on this case. And also to CSO Online and Dark Reading for reporting on this, which is how I initially discovered it. And of course, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime. My name is Chloe Tonis, and until next time, stay secure.